Sounds good.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Backyard Boys Outdoor Podcast. This is episode number 3 today. I'm super excited. I got one of the best in the business, co-owner of Real World Outdoor Products and operator of Higgins Outdoor, Mr. Don Higgins himself. Welcome, Don, to our podcast. Before we get started with going into some nitty-gritty, why don't you introduce yourself, Don? Tell us how you got started in the industry, who you are, where you're from, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, I appreciate you having me on. So I'm Don Higgins. I started as an outdoor writer back about 25 years ago. It's how I got into the industry. Started writing magazine articles, and one thing led to another. Eventually, I started Real World Wildlife Products about, this is our 12th year in business. So, other things grew from that. I started a consulting business, just had a lot of people calling and asking if I would look at their property. And so I started a consulting business, which has really taken off. Started a podcast of my own called Chasing Giants last year. Got a new YouTube channel. Basically, if it's got anything to do with deer hunting, hunting big bucks, I've got my hand in it somehow.
Nice. Now, I've been following you a little bit here, and something I thought was really interesting was when I was listening to you on another podcast. You used to raise deer, right?
I did. I had a small herd of captive deer that I used for basically research, my own studies and such. I had them for about 25 years, but got rid of those about 3 years ago.
Okay. How did that help you as far as like as a hunter or learning deer?
Well, it just it just really showed me firsthand the life cycle of deer, for one thing, and the annual cycle. Not only the antler growth cycle, but the life cycle from a fawn from the time it's conceived all the way until it's a mature buck. One of the biggest lessons I learned was how individual deer are. They're just like humans, they got general tendencies, but they're also individuals, which was one of the biggest takeaways. But most of my studies were revolved around deer nutrition and genetics. So having those captive deer were really instrumental in helping me get a firm handle on the nutritional aspects of a deer, and how they change throughout the year really is a huge thing that I don't think most hunters realize. But then antler trait genetics, and the role that for example, that the mother or the doe plays in that equation, I don't think is understood by most deer hunters. So there's just a lot of little things that over the 25 years I had those captive deer that really helped me in the woods hunting the wild deer.
Cool. Without going crazy in detail, because I know it's probably crazy detail, you said nutrition. You learn the nutrition of the deer as they change throughout the year. Like, tell us a little bit about that. What do you mean by that?
Well, one big thing is that a deer's nutritional requirements change throughout the year, and their feed intake really changes. So if you would start, say, in early spring, the deer's metabolism in the winter really slows down, and they don't require near as much feed. And some days they hardly eat at all. But that slowly ramps up in the spring with the changing of the seasons. The does are carrying those fawns, and they're getting closer to fawning time, and the bucks are starting to grow those antlers. And as they reach those different points in their cycle, the nutritional requirements pick up, and so their appetite picks up, and their feed intake is a whole lot more than it is in the winter. But it really continues to climb throughout the entire summer, and it peaks in early fall, like September, early October. One example, several years ago in one pen, I had a group of bucks, and in the early fall, I was feeding those bucks 2 full 5-gallon buckets full of feed every single day, and they were cleaning it up. that same group of bucks that later in the winter, 4 months later, they were only eating less than a half of a 5-gallon bucket of feed. Their feed intake was about a quarter what it was earlier in the fall. And, I think a lot of times we think, well, in the winter after the rut, the deer really pound the food. And they do at times. It seems to coincide with the weather. The colder temperatures is what really drives them deer to feed in the winter. There's also the misconception that after the rut, the bucks go on feed and start, feeding heavy to replace those lost fat reserves and such. That does not happen. When a deer loses weight in the rut, he does not start picking weight back up until the next spring when his feed intake increases. So when they get run down from the rut, they're run down for the winter. And that causes a lot of them to, perish, the wild deer to perish because they just get so run down. But, there's just a lot of little interesting tidbits, of information in regards to nutrition. The protein level, for example, is higher in the summer when the does are nursing fawns and when the bucks are growing their antlers. You get into the fall months, the carbohydrates are more critical as they're putting on fat for the winter. So not only does the level of feed intake change throughout the season, but the quality of that food, they can get by with a lot lower quality food or lower protein in the fall and winter than what they need in the spring and summer.
Okay. So did this help you? Did Raise Need help you start your real world products then?
Yeah, it absolutely did. Especially with the soybeans was the first product we actually came out with. And we came out with about 3 or 4 when we first started the company, but our testing started years before we ever went into business. And the first product that we were testing was the soybeans. And the reason for it was I'd seen that in the wintertime, a high protein food source such as soybeans is really in very short supply in most of the, whitetail habitat across the country. But when they can, an animal has a unique ability to balance its own diet. So those soybeans are really high in protein, and the deer intake that, but they balance it with natural browse and other food sources to get that protein level of their total diet where it needs to be. However, if you don't have a high protein food source at that time of the year, they do not have the opportunity to do that. So that really helps get those deer through that critical winter period, sets them up in the spring for, antler growth or fawn production.
Okay, that's cool. So your real world, I know they're G2 bean, your Gen 2 beans. My brother-in-law loves them. He uses them in like north central Michigan, and he says the deer just hammer them. So tell us a little bit about, since you said that was your first test, and now I know you had Gen 2, so they obviously you changed them a little bit.
Yep. So when we started out with the soybeans, I had recognized some years before this that the importance of soybeans in the wintertime for whitetail food. And at that time, what I was doing is I was just getting soybeans from my neighbor who's a big farmer, and whatever he had on hand, I'd get a bag or 2 from him. That's what I planted in my food plots. And some years it worked fantastic. I had a good stand of beans, and there was plenty of beans there in the winter, and the deer would always be there to consume them. But some years those soybean pods would shatter open. They'd burst open and drop the grain onto the ground, in the mud or snow or whatever. So the soybeans weren't there for the deer to consume. And, one year I had that happen. I was sitting in my stand overlooking my soybean plot, and typically it would be loaded with deer that time of the year, and there was no deer there because the soybeans were not there. And I got to thinking, I need to come up with a variety of soybeans that is shatter resistant, that stays in the pod. And so we started testing various soybean varieties to find the ones that had the best shatter resistance. And the way we did that was we just planted every variety we could find. And I think, and that testing actually continues to this day. And we planted somewhere over 300 different varieties over the years. But when we started, those varieties would be planted in little 30-foot square sections. And in one field, we may have, 25 or 30 different varieties of soybeans in these little sections. And we didn't even look at the shatter. There's a shatter rating on ag beans, and that shatter is looked at in the ag industry in the fall at harvest time, because the farmers, they don't want that bean to shatter before harvest. They want it to still be there in the pod where it can be harvested. So we looked at shatter in March. We allowed those beans to stand. We had a utilization cage in each little test plot, and we would allow those beans to stand through the entire winter. And then we would go in March and see which ones had shattered, which ones had not. And, we started testing here on farms, our farms in central Illinois, but when we found varieties that showed promise, we would send them to friends and such around the country and have them test them. And that's how it originally started. Well, our testing continued and continues to this day. Every year we're planting varieties of soybeans we've never planted before. And along the way, we noticed that there were certain varieties the deer were just attracted to more than others. And when you had those test plots side by side, the deer would come out into the test plot and they would all congregate in one variety. And until that variety was totally consumed, they wouldn't move on to the others. Now, eventually at the end of the winter, they would consume all of them. But right out of the gate, there were certain ones that they really keyed in on. And what we finally determined was that some soybeans have higher oil content than others. And those higher oil soybeans are the ones that were the most palatable and the most attractive to the deer. So then we combined the two traits, the shatter resistance and the high oil content, and we revamped the mix and called it Generation 2. So there's 4 soybeans in the blend. 2 of those soybeans that are in the Generation 2 were in the original blend, but there's 2 that we changed out and went with some higher oil varieties. The other thing, a lot of people ask, well, why do you have 4 varieties? Well, there's certain times where weather conditions, climatic conditions, will cause a soybean to shatter, a particular specific soybean variety to shatter. So what we wanted to do was hedge our bets. So if a certain weather condition comes along that maybe causes one of our soybeans in our blend to shatter, well, there's still 3 others in the blend that are going to be there for the deer. And so we hedged our bets that way. We're getting ready to produce over the course of this year a new video that's going to really detail the process that we go through. I know some people kind of shudder at the cost of a bag of soybeans, $75, and they say, I can go to my ag co-op and I can get them for $50, whatever. Well, that's true, but your ag bean has never been tested for shatter and for oil content. And there's quite the process, the treating of the seed and the cleaning of the seed and everything that goes into that bag that the consumer really doesn't see. And so we're going to really document all that throughout the course of this year. And early next year, we'll be releasing a soybean video that is going to go into detail about a lot of these things and why we think that bag of soybeans is the best soybean you could ever plant for whitetails.
Nice. Yeah, like I said, I personally don't have the size of property to put it on. All my one property that I can plant is small. And so, half an acre of Gen 2 beans, I would have to fence it in. And then I've heard mixed opinions on that. But my brother-in-law, he planted a pretty good size of it last year with those Gen 2s. And he said those deer all the way through, winter, everything, just we're slamming that, and he's got a pretty big herd. He's up in Newaygo County, and he's got a huge herd up there of, the doe population is really big up there. So he said he thinks he had pretty much every deer in the area on his field, and so that was pretty cool to hear that, that Gen 2, it really held up through the winter and stuff. So, so other products I've used your Deadly Dozen. I know that's a big product of yours. Other than Deadly Dozen, what are some of the other good products? And you can explain Deadly Dozen a little bit too, if you want.
Yeah, Deadly Dozen is, well, first of all, my favorite food plot by far is soybeans. I've got about 2/3 of my acreage on my farm every year is my food plot acreage is in soybeans. And the other third is primarily Deadly Dozen. And Deadly Dozen is a mixture of 12 different plant species. It's got your cereal grains like your rye, your wheat, oats. It's got Austrian winter peas. It's got your brassicas like your turnips, radish, sugar beets, kale. And what I love about it is there's something in that mix that the deer are going to hammer from the time it first comes up through the entire hunting season until and into the next spring. And the next spring, when it's going to be green, it makes a great turkey plot because it's greens up early. But there's always something, and you know, it's always changing as the seasons go along because the nitrate levels in the leaves of the different plants are changing, the sugar levels. So what the deer are going to hit when it first germinates is going to be different than what they're hitting in the middle of winter, but it's the same plot. So there's, with those 12 different plant species, and each species has a specific window of time where it's the most palatable, and they're always shifting, all 12 of those. So there's always something that the deer are hitting. So that's one of my favorites. You know, our bedding grasses have become really popular. We got our own variety of switchgrass. We did the side-by-side test with every variety of switchgrass we could possibly find, and finding them in the side-by-side test plots on various farms, and came up with the one that was the tallest and stood the best. I got it growing on my farm. I've got about 35 acres of it now. I just planted another plot of it this spring. That one's become real popular. We've got a bedding in a bag mix that's got 3 different native grasses. It's got the same switchgrass, but it's also got big blue stem and Indian grass. It works great on CRP acreage where they don't want a monoculture, but they want a mixture of different grasses. Sometimes they may require you to add some forbs in with those grasses. But that's a good product if you've got your acreage enrolled in CRP. This year we came out with giant miscanthus. Did a search on the different miscanthus varieties out there, found a patented variety. Contacted the company, went and visited some test plots that they had at the University of North Carolina State University. University of Illinois has some miscanthus test plots. We also visited some on private properties. So we did a lot of research on that. We found a variety of giant miscanthus that has a more leaf to it than a lot of them. A lot of them have they're more stalk than they are leaf. They have like a bamboo type stalk. And the variety we've got has plenty of that stalk too, but there's more leaf on that stalk for better screening. We released that this spring and it did fantastic. We sold 5 times what we thought we would. And we thought we'd never sell out, but we had to shut off sales there back in April, I believe it was, early April. But we're going to have plenty in the future. We just weren't expecting quite the rush that we got on that one. Real World is also into deer nutrition. We've got our own line of mineral, Maximizer mineral. The Maximizer mineral line started with research in my own captive pen. I did, when I had those captive deer, one year I acquired 7 sets of twin buck fawns. And we took those 7 sets and we divided them into 2 different pens. So there were 7 bucks in each pen. Each buck had a twin brother in the other pen. We fed those the very same diet, but in one pen, we top dressed their feed with mineral, a mineral mix that I was working on at the time. And then we would raise those bucks up through the antler growing season. In the fall, you've got to cut the antlers off of captive deer or they'll kill each other in captivity there where they can't get away from each other. So in the fall, we would tranquilize these bucks, measure their antlers, get a gross Boone and Crockett antler score from each buck and record that. Then we would compare like the average antler score in one pen compared to the other, and did that for 3 years. And with all the research I did, to back up a little bit, that was just the beginning of the Maximizer story. So then we acquired, or we met a couple of livestock nutritionists that started working with us, and probably the premier whitetail veterinarian in the world, Dr. Clifford Shipley at the University of Illinois. And with the nutritionist and Dr. Shipley, we fine-tuned our mineral formula and released the Maximizer mineral. It's probably been at least 5 years ago now, maybe 6 or 7 years. I don't know, time gets away from me, but that whole mineral started with research in my captive and parent sets of twin buck fawns. And then, later we added the Expect Healthy Deer technology, which is another science-based product that we acquired from the livestock nutritionist. We didn't come up with that ourselves, but, independent research at the University of Minnesota proved the effectiveness of that product in combating EHD. So that was a big step we took about 3 years ago, I believe it was. Basically, we are always looking for new products that appeal to the whitetail land manager. If it's a product that we would use on our own property, that's the kind of products that we're looking to market.
Nice. Now, did you ever compare the twins? Like, what was the difference between the one that had the Maximizer and the other one that didn't?
So we did. I did keep records of that. And, when they were yearling bucks, I don't recall the exact figure, but the ones that got the mineral were a little better than the other pen. At 2 years old, that gap got a little bit bigger. At 3 years old, a little bit bigger. And based on that research and some other research, not that I've done, but that was done at Mississippi State University, Dr. Bronson Strickland, and research that was done with beef cattle at Oregon State University. And this research was, it was relevant to fetal programming. Fetal programming basically is the idea that the nutrition that a fetus gets while it's in its mother sets that animal up for life. In other words, if he's shortchanged as a fetus, he is never, ever going to be able to reach his full genetic potential.
Interesting.
However, if he gets, and that's why when a woman gets pregnant, a doctor encourages her to take prenatal vitamins. It's really important that fetus is properly nourished. It was proven with cattle at Oregon State University, and the research there proved that if that calf did not get proper nutrition, it could never be made up for later. And if he did his entire life, his average daily weight gain was better. His feed conversion efficiency, and in other words, how much feed it took that animal to consume to put a pound of gain on, his feed efficiency was better. Just a whole list of benefits of of that female getting proper nutrition while she was pregnant. And Dr. Bronson Strickland further proved that with whitetails in his study. And I could explain that, but it'd take me another 10 minutes. So to answer your question, in my opinion, based on what I've seen with these sets of twin buck fawns and information on this fetal programming, I think that a good nutrition program on a property, you could see on average for a mature buck a gain of somewhere between 10 and 15% of his gross antler score. And again, that's at a mature age of 5 years old or more. And that's provided that animal came from a doe that received proper nutrition whenever he was pregnant, which leads to a really interesting thought. People, it's summertime now, the bucks and does, they'll really hit a mineral lick, and you can put out straight salt and they're going to hit it. And there's some products that'll guarantee bigger bucks. And that's impossible for that product simply because of the ingredients that are in it. But a proper nutrition program is going to take 5 years for you to really see the benefit. So if you started a nutrition program right now, here we are in June, you start it right now, what you're doing is you're setting that dough up for this fall. So she's going to get bred and conceived in November during the rut. You want to get her nutrition level on the highest plane possible before she gets bred, and keep it there. Conceive this fall is going to be the first generation on your property that's really going to be able to maximize, or you're going to be able to maximize his genetic potential. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to go out and all of a sudden you're going to have 200-inch bucks everywhere. Genetic potential, I think, is where a lot of hunters and, novice land managers kind of get hung up. They think, well, I'm going to go out here and feed, magic mineral and supplemental feed. And all these 8-pointers I see are going to magically turn into 10 and 12 pointers, and they're going to add 20 inches and this and that. If you think of genetic potential in human terms, if your genetic potential only allows you to get to be 5'10", it doesn't matter what you eat or what you do. You're never going to be 6'2". And it's the same buck. If his maximum genetic potential is, say, 150-inch 8-point, the thing of it is, most of the time in the wild, he's not going to be 150-inch 8-point because he just don't have the nutrition there to reach his maximum genetic potential. So I think sometimes hunters and novice land managers have unrealistic expectations, and they don't realize that first of all, that it's going to take 5 years to really see the benefits of any nutrition program. And secondly, I don't think they really understand the genetic limits that some deer have. So.
Cool. All right, let's switch gears a little bit, Don, and let's talk a little bit about you run Higgins Outdoors, which is a little bit of consulting, stuff like that. So let's talk about that. I had a consultant on a couple weeks ago. He's a Michigan consultant. So let's talk about what are you doing when you go to a property? What are you looking for? What are you doing? The size of properties that you're doing.
Well, first of all, before I take on any client, I want to see an aerial photo of his property, and I got a series of about 10 or 12 questions that I ask. I'll send them to him on an email, and he can answer at his convenience. And basically, I want to get a really good feel for his property and for him and what he expects, his goals, but what else is taking place on that property. What's the hunting pressure like around that property? I want to make sure that I can help him reach his goal. If I can't, then I'm not going to take him on as a client. So that's how I start. And every year I turn down clients because it's not a good fit. I don't just say thanks, but no thanks. I explain to each person. It don't cost them anything to send me an aerial, and then I'll reply with my series of questions, and we'll have a discussion. I don't charge them anything for that. If I don't think I can help them reach their goals, I tell them exactly why. I tell them what concerns me in their answers. But if I do feel I can help them, we come to an agreement. I will show up at their property. I will tour that property, and I will look at it as if it was my own property. If I had just bought it, this is my first day on the place, I'm going to lay out everything that I would do. I'm going to mark the trees where I would be putting up tree stands. I'm going to lay out where I would plant the food plots. I'm going to lay out access to those tree stands, how I would access them, how I would play the wind, what wind direction you need to be hunting each stand with, what I would plant in the food plots, what I would do to enhance bedding cover, water holes, whatever is needed on that property. I'm going to lay it out exactly as if I owned it. And I will lay that out with a marked aerial map of the property and in a written plan. I will then send that plan to the landowner, both a hard copy by mail and a digital copy by email. And then I keep a copy of that plan and that aerial on my computer. So that landowner can call me back years down the road. I don't care if it's 5 years or however long it is. And he, with any questions that he might have, and he can say, I got a question about tree stand number 3 or food plot 4 or whatever. And I've got that aerial in front of me so I can answer his questions and give him a good, solid answer. I'm not just, pulling answers out of the air. I'm looking at his aerial as I'm answering his questions. And because I'll remember his property once I pull that aerial up. And a lot of times I will anyway. But, a consulting visit with me is not a one-day deal. It's not, here I am, here's your plan, see you later. It's a continual process because the best advertisement for my services is a successful client. And I want that client more than anything to shoot the biggest buck of his life within a couple of years of me being there. And if that happens, then he's happy and I'm happy and he's telling somebody else about it and they're calling me. Yeah. So I don't want unhappy clients. That's why I kind of screen my clients with those questions at the very beginning.
Now, you said you look at their aerial and you're looking at the property around it. What are you looking for?
The first thing I look for is the weakest link. And I just did just released a video this week on the weakest link.
Yeah, I like that. It was good.
Oh, thank you. So I want to know what's in shortest supply, not on his property, but in his whole neighborhood around his property. Sometimes it's food. You get into area where it's real heavily wooded and everything, and food is what's going to set his property apart from his neighbors. And if that's the case, then, that's what we got to address first. In other areas like where I'm at, I'm in an area where there's a lot of agriculture. Cover is the key. If you got the cover around here and you manage it correctly, you're going to have the deer. So I'm looking for that weakest link. It's the very first thing I look for. And, a couple of things I tell my clients right out of the gate is, first of all, I tell them to think of their property as one square on a giant checkerboard. And you're in an airplane 30,000 feet, you're looking down, and your property is just one tiny square on a giant checkerboard. So we got to do everything we can to make your square the best square on that checkerboard, better than all the squares around us in the eyes of the local deer. And part of that's addressing the weakest link, finding that weakest link and addressing it the best way we possibly can. The other thing that I tell them right out of the gate is if you want to consistently kill big mature bucks, you absolutely have to hunt them on the properties where they spend their daylight hours. If you think about it, in the course of an entire hunting season, how many daylight hours does a mature buck spend in a food plot? Very, very few. In fact, you could probably count on one hand the total hours that buck is going to be in daylight hours in a food plot. However, if you've got him bedding on your property, you've got a real chance to kill him. That's what you got to do, really. If you're just one property over from where a buck's bedding and you're trying to pull him over there, your odds of killing that deer are 10% what they are if you're on the same property. So we got to do whatever we can to get that mature buck or some of the mature bucks in an area to bed on the property that we're working on.
Okay. So, what's too small of a property, do you think? So if you're trying to implement this whole thing, what would be too small of a property? I mean, I'm working with 30 acres of solid wood. Is that too small of a property to do something of that on?
No, I've actually in Michigan, I did a property 2 winters ago that was 8 acres.
Really?
The property that was 10 acres right here in central Illinois. Just a lot of it, the smaller the property, the more critical the landowner's goal becomes. And also the more critical what's going on around the property becomes. In other words, if you've got 10 acres and you got neighbors on 4 sides sitting your fence, you're going to be really limited. And that's where my questions come in at the beginning where I'm screening my clients. I had a guy one time that had 40 acres and his goal, and he had 3 other people hunting with him. So he had 4 guys on 40 acres and his goal was to shoot a booner every single year. Well, I don't care where you are. You can be in the best property in Iowa and 40 acres with 4 guys hunting it. You cannot guarantee a guy a booner every year. And I could just see that, there was nothing I could do to help this man reach his goals. And I just had a very polite and candid conversation with him. And I said, you know, your goals are just out of line for the property you've got and the number of people you've got hunting there. So, you know, the size of the property, it's a big factor, but, you know, the hunting pressure, what's going on around the property, how it sits. I mean, if you got 5 acres and it sits next to a 500-acre sanctuary, well, that could be the best 5 acres in North America if it's set up and hunted right. So there's just a lot of variables. So, I mean, I've done properties all the way from 8 acres was the smallest I've ever done up to well over 1,000.
Okay. So what's one thing that when you go to a property, other than, I mean, obviously the obvious, the access and stuff like that, like you're really trying to focus on it? You know, is it bedding? Is it food? I mean, properties are going to vary a little bit, but there's, you know, a sanctuary. What is it?
If there's one thing, it's a sanctuary. We got to get those bucks bedded there. There's really, from my perspective, as I look at a client, I'm looking at a client one of two ways. Is this a guy that is trying to kill the bucks that are already there in his area, not necessarily on his property, but in his area? For example, if his goal is 150-inch bucks, is there already 150-inch bucks in his area? And if so, that's a lot easier client for me to deal with than one that wants to grow bigger bucks. So, you know, he's killing the better bucks in his area, and he's killing 150-inch bucks every year. But he's just not seeing any bucks bigger, and he wants to bump that up to 170-inch bucks. And I love that challenge, but it's a lot tougher, but it can be done for sure. So what I'm looking at is what's this client's ultimate goal? Is he wanting to kill the bucks that are already there, or is he wanting to grow bigger bucks and kill them? Yeah. And no matter which goal he has, we got to get those bucks bedded on that property. Like I said, if that buck is bedded in the next property over, one property over, his odds of killing that deer are 10% what they are if they're on the same property. So no matter which of those goals he has, we got to get those bucks bedded on his place.
Is there a specific spot that you know bucks bed in? Like, I know if there's too many does, now those bucks probably won't bed there, right? Because we get too big of a doe factory.
Well, ironically, I just put out a video on doe factories too. I guess you haven't seen that one, but I don't believe that idea whatsoever. And the reason for it is I just never seen a situation like that. Here on my home property, I promise you, it's not a big property. I got 120 acres. But I'm guessing during hunting season, and especially towards the end of hunting season, I've probably got more deer on my 120 acres than my entire township combined. A lot of those deer are does. A mature buck, his number one desire is freedom of human intrusion. He does not want to be bothered. He wants to be bedded where he does not encounter humans. And if he has to put up with does that are stacked on top of each other, he will. And I also have more mature bucks on my property than the entire township combined, just because of how I manage it. And I've laid it out that way. Not that, you know, I'm anything special, but I've just figured out what it takes to get the deer staying on a place. And I do that. And I've got tons and tons of does, but I've also got plenty of mature bucks and bucks of every age class, really.
That's interesting. That might be one of the first times I've heard that, but I'm still learning as I go on this, you know, the doe factory and stuff like that. And I've been doing a lot of research on it as well, because one of the properties that I manage is only 13 acres, and there's, you know, does there, and I didn't know if they took all the bedding, if my bucks were leaving for a certain reason, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And then I just got a new property, 30 acres, and I haven't hunted it yet, brand new, and I know there's a lot of does there. I mean, you can just tell there's a lot of does there, and I'm like, you know, are there going to be too many? Do I need to take a bunch out? You know, so that's interesting to know. But yes, so sanctuary is the key. Getting the bucks, the kind of, you know, staying out. Now, you say human intrusion. Does that mean all year long? Does that mean just a specific time of year? I'm a big turkey hunter. I know some of our listeners are big turkey hunters. Like what does that mean?
It's a year-round deal. I think that more good deer properties are ruined by human intrusion than anything else. I mean, again, that's big buck's number one desire is freedom of human intrusion. So, you know, when I do habitat work, and now last winter I went into my property and I did a lot of work. I'm revamping this property and I'm taking it to the next level. And it's already the best property I've ever hunted in my life. But I seen some projects that I could get done to make it even better. And I just went in there this winter and just hammered away at those. Typically, whenever I'll go shed antler hunting on my property one time. I go in and I find them. I wait till March to do it, and I get out. My tree stands, or every one of my tree stands, are less than 10 yards from the edge of my property. The heart of the property is left to the deer. They have it. Because I got to get them staying there. If I can get them staying there, I can kill them out on the edge. If they're not staying there, it doesn't matter where I'm sitting. So it's really key to get them in there. But that human intrusion is a year-round, lack of human intrusion is a year-round deal. And the thing of it is, the deer pick up on it, and with each succeeding generation of deer, it becomes more ingrained into their head. So when I started years ago, working on this, probably 30 years ago, working on this property, if I jumped a deer on my place, they jumped up and they busted out of the cover and they ran a mile across the open fields to the next woods. Well, today when I jump deer on my property, they don't want to leave. They'll just get up and run to the other side of the property. I can go there and back. They don't want to leave because they feel so secure here. But it's taken decades to get to that point. And each generation, it just seems to become more ingrained in them that this is the safe zone. You know, if you think of a place like, say, a state park where no hunting's been allowed for decades, and you can drive through that state park and you see these deer feeding in the ditch right by your car as you drive by, there's really been nothing done to that place whatsoever as far as habitat enhancement or anything like that. The only thing that's happened is those deer are safe there, and they've learned to recognize it. And we had such a park not far from my house that I used to go to and just to watch the deer. And it dawned on me, if I could replicate what's going on here at this state park, if I could replicate that on my property, you know, over time, I should have deer relating to it the same way. And that's exactly what I did. I just shut down human intrusion. Those deer. And the other thing is, I think the deer on a specific property, I don't think they recognize you and I by our physical appearance like we recognize each other, but I do believe that a deer can recognize two people by their scent. One of us is going to smell a little bit different than the other. I firmly believe the deer on my property recognize me and my smell, and I no longer pose a danger to them. The buck I shot in 2017, Smokey, you know, he was 6.5 years old, scored 206 inches. That deer became comfortable here. Now, he's an extreme example, but, you know, he was on that property from the time I got trail camera pictures of him since he was 2.5. He was probably here as a 1.5 years old. I just didn't recognize his rack as he changed. But he recognized this place as a safe zone. He related to it as his sanctuary. And as he got older, he actually got more comfortable moving. And Bill Winkeys wrote about this several times, how as bucks get into those older age classes, you know, 6, 7, 8 years old, they become easier to kill because their core range shrinks, or their home range shrinks, and their core area shrinks, and they become comfortable. They feel secure there. They just, you know, they've been safe there for so long, and what they've done to survive has worked so well. It becomes ingrained to their head that, hey, this is what I got to do to survive, and they become a little more comfortable, and they let their guard down a little bit, and they become easier to kill, really.
Okay. Hey, well, that takes us kind of right into our next segue a little bit. You've wrote a couple articles, Homecoming and Same Time, Same Place. 2 articles that I think are just fantastic. And I'm dealing with one right now, matter of fact, on my small property that I have a 4.5, he'll be a 4.5 this year. And he leaves the same time every year. And then he'll come back after rut and it's just bugging the crap out of me. And I'm just like, man, but then I read these articles, I'm like, it makes sense. It makes sense. So explain a little bit about that, about like the home ranges, and then a little bit about those articles.
Same time, same place is one I wrote in 2003 for North American Whitetail. And at the time, I hadn't seen anyone cover this topic. It's become, kind of beaten to death since then. But basically what I noticed was that these bucks were showing up in the same areas at the same time year after year, and trail cameras really show it. So, bucks, a lot of bucks, what I've noticed here in the farm country is that about 50% of the bucks shift from they have a separate fall winter range than what they have a spring summer range. So they don't spend their spring and summer where they're going to spend their fall and winter. And that shift from the summer range to the fall range usually happens about the time they shed velvet, in September. Some of it happens in October. But whenever it happens with an individual buck, it's going to happen with that individual buck the same week every year. If he moves from his summer range to his fall range, say the third week of September, he's moving the third week of September for his entire life. I've just seen it way too many times with too many different bucks. Bucks seem to follow an annual pattern more than a daily pattern. And that annual pattern is you can almost mark it on the calendar. So what's that mean to you and I, the deer hunter? Well, if you get a trail camera picture, or you've got a trail camera picture from last year of a buck you want to kill this fall, where you got that picture and the date on that picture is telling you where he's going to be this coming year on that same date. And he might not be at that exact spot right in front of that camera, but he's going to be right there close on that property or very, very close to it. There was a buck I shot in 2015, 180-inch buck. He was 6.5 years old. I watched that buck through trail camera pictures and patterned him through trail camera pictures for 5 years before I put him on the hit list. And what he was doing is somewhere starting about November, there was one property I had permission to hunt. It was a wooded draw behind these people's barn, and a little ditch there that had some trees on both sides of it, just a long, narrow strip. And there was always a group of does and fawns that would stay in that strip. What I noticed with my trail cameras is this particular buck would show up there approximately November 6th every year. And from the 6th to November 20th, he would be in that, over the 2-week period. He would come into that draw on a regular basis looking for those does, to make sure, see if there was one in heat or whatever. So I'd watch that buck for 5 years, and the year comes that I want to kill him. November 6th rolls around, I'm ready to roll, but the wind's wrong. I can't hunt my stand. I had 2 stands in there. So I stayed away. November 7th, the wind's wrong again, and I'm ready to go after this deer, and this is where patience pays off. November 8th, I finally get the right wind I need. I slip in and I shoot that buck the first morning I hunted for him. I watched that deer for 5 years and then kill him the first morning I hunted for him. And that was the second year in a row that I killed my target buck the first morning I hunted for him. And it was all based on past history from trail camera pictures. I think a lot of guys use their trail cameras. They're trying to pick up on patterns now that they can use this season. So they go check their camera and, wow, this buck has been by my camera 3 times in the last week during daylight. It's time to get in there. Well, guess what? You're a step behind that buck. He was there last week in daylight, not this week. You may kill him, but that's not the best approach. What I found the best approach is you pick up that annual pattern where that buck's going to be at a specific time of the year, and you get your stand ready, and then you stay out until it's that time, and then you slip in. He don't even know he's being hunted, but you're a step ahead of the deer then. And too many hunters are a step behind the bucks they're trying to kill. I try to get a step ahead of them and be there waiting when they show up.
Oh, that's crazy. I've been using my trail cameras for the last, I don't know how long, but I mean before, but that's exactly how I do. I was like, oh man, that buck's been, he's been coming out in daylight. I'm trying to look at the wind direction he's doing it and stuff. But I'm telling you right now, this 4.5-year-old, that it's starting to all make sense, because he leaves early October and I don't see him again on a trail camera. Now he could be around. I don't know. He could just be bypassing my camera. but I pretty much I haven't seen him. I have not seen him yet during season.
That's a perfect scenario for the next article we're going to talk about, which is that you brought up, which is homecoming bucks. So, as I mentioned, from my trail cameras, I've noticed in this part of the world, I'm not saying this applies everywhere, but here in ag country, about 50% of the bucks will shift their home range in the fall from their summer range to a fall range. And I've watched bucks, in the summer that I wanted to kill, and they disappeared and they moved like the buck you're talking about, and I never laid eyes on them. And finally, there was a buck a few years ago that really opened my eyes to a pattern that I've seen with other bucks since. So this buck, individual buck, he's got a summer range, and that's where you're seeing him. And then hunting season rolls around, he's gone. And you think your chances are done because he ain't coming back until, winter or whenever. However, I picked up on two distinct times when those bucks will return to their summer range. And that's why I call them homecoming bucks. They're coming home to where they summered. One of those times is very early in the rut, around November 7th. Incidentally, more booners are killed on November 7th than any other day. November 7th, them bucks are at a fever pitch. They're ready to breed does, but the does are just not quite there yet. You start getting into the 9th, 10th of November, there's a hot doe, and the biggest buck is going to be with her. But that period right before then, around the 7th and the 8th, are my favorite times to hunt because them bucks are ready, and they're on the move looking for does. And a lot of times what happens is those bucks have moved to their fall range. They really want a doe to breed, and they're looking, and they can't find her, and they get desperate. And so they make a run back to where they summered, and they'll spend about 24 hours. They don't stay very long. They'll stay about one day, about 24 hours. They'll run back to that summer range, and I know what they're doing. They're looking for a hot doe, and I've seen this with multiple bucks. I've got the trail camera pictures to prove it. And they'll come back to that summer range for about 24 hours, right about that November 7th time frame, from the 5th to the 8th. If I had to really pin it down, from the 5th to the 8th, is when you really need to be in your stand waiting on that buck to return. That's your best chance to kill him. So, and then if he finds a doe there, then he may stick around for, 24, 48 hours, but he soon returns to his fall range. The very same thing happens at the tail end of the rut. And I think it's the same scenario. He's in that fall range. He's got does there. He's going from one doe to the next, breeding does. And when he's done with one doe, it doesn't take him very long, and he finds the next one. But then you get around that Thanksgiving period, and that buck, he's having a harder time finding his next girlfriend, his next hot doe. So what's he do? He makes a run back to his summer range, and once again, he's looking for a hot doe there. And again, it don't last long, about 24 hours. But I actually got a seminar I do on this, and I'm showing trail camera pictures of these bucks that here he is in the summer. I don't get a single picture of him all fall, but here he is, that November 7th time frame, one picture. Don't get a picture of him for the entire rest of the rut. He is again Thanksgiving weekend, one picture. Then he's gone again for the rest of the season.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I
have a buck.
Go ahead.
If you've got that move, you've got him pinned for the summer, you know where he summers, and then he moves like the buck you're talking about, there's a good chance he'll come back either really early in the rut or really late in the rut.
Yeah, because
it's a one better be there when it happens.
Yeah, I think I got a picture of him again. Let's see. I last picture I had was October 6th, and I think he came back December 15th was my next picture of him. So he came back a little later. But what about let's say, I was telling you earlier, I run mobile cameras, and I'm running my mobile camera, and I got this buck that shows up that I've never seen before. Is that a time where I can use that intel and say, oh man, that buck's going to be here for a week or so?
So he's a new buck that just shows up out of the blue?
Yes, that I've never seen before.
I think it depends on the time of the year. If he shows up in November, he's probably not going to be there too long.
Okay.
You better on it in a hurry. If he shows up in late season, a lot of that late season movement that I've noticed is centered around food sources. If you get the worse the weather, the more you see of it. But what I've noticed on my place is when we get really bad winters, I'll start having deer show up that I've never seen, bucks especially, show up that I've never seen before. And that's when I've got the most deer on my property will be in the late season. And the worse the weather, the more the deer I got.
Okay. So basically, just to kind of redo that, you're using your cameras, your trail cameras, totally different than most people I know and I talk to. You're using them as a yearly thing, as the next year or the year after sort of deal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you know, for a lot of years, I thought what separated the guys that consistently kill mature bucks from the guys that want to, I thought it was all about passion. The guys that do it consistently have more passion than the other people. They put in the time, the effort, and all that. But as the years have gone by, I realize it's not passion at all. There's a lot of really passionate deer hunters that are not killing big bucks consistently. What separates those that are doing it from those that want to is discipline. It takes a lot of discipline to know that this buck is not going to come back into my area until November 6th. I don't even want to go onto that property in October. I don't want to be in there running trail cameras. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to disturb that property at all. It takes a lot of discipline to know that, man, it's November 6th. It's time for that buck to come back, but the wind's wrong. I can't chance it. I got to stay away. Discipline is what sets apart the guys that do it consistently from those that want to. So just a little extra information to throw in there for you.
Nice. One last kind of tidbit on discipline and hunting and stuff like that before we wrap it up. Now, I'm assuming, Don, you're taking does out and stuff like that as well. When are you doing that?
Well, my area got hit really bad with EHD in 2012. I have not shot a doe since 2011.
Okay.
Our herd's been built up. Now I'm going to start again, and I'm going to start again this season. What you got to be careful about is, late in the year, a lot of the does that are on my property are not resident does. They're does that have moved in because of the food I've provided and the security that I provided. So that food and security is it's a magnet. I'm pulling in deer from all over. So I really need to be shooting those does, those resident does, early in the season. And that's what I plan to do. And it's what I've done in the past. But I'm very careful about where I do it. I'm not going to be sitting in my prime stands shooting those does. I'll sit, out on the edge, away from the main deer activity where I've got a chance. And where I can, usually it's an observation type stand where I can sit out on the edge somewhere and I can overlook a big area and watch deer movement. But at the same time, I've still got a reasonable chance to shoot a doe. And if one comes by, I absolutely do. But, to take this question really full circle, I talked earlier about fetal programming. And so it's Mother Nature's way of preventing inbreeding is when a doe is getting ready to have fawns, she'll still have her yearling fawns from the previous year with her, and she will kick those buck fawns off. And radio-collared research has proven that a buck fawn or a yearling buck will disperse from his birth area on average between 5 and 20 miles. And again, it's Mother Nature's way of preventing inbreeding. That same research has also shown that if his mother has died, if she has been killed, and she's not there to kick him off as a yearling, 90% of the time he stays right there where he was born. So I'm specifically targeting, or going to be targeting, those does that have buck fawns with them. If I see a doe and she's got twin buck fawns, she's in trouble. That's the one I'm shooting, because the odds are very good that those bucks, because I've given her the nutrition she's needed to raise those fawns and get them fawns off to a great start. The last thing I want those buck fawns doing is relocating 5 miles away for somebody else to shoot. I want to keep them home as long as I can. So I'm going to really be targeting, those does that have buck fawns with them.
Yeah, I like how you say that, because that was I talked to a big QDMA guy, and he was that was the one thing, that was the one thing I was always confused about, when I first started is, man, she has twins, or twin bucks, I want to keep her around. And he's like, no, 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 no. Those, you don't want twin of the mind. You want to take her out. And I'm glad you said that, because I think that's a big, big component that some people really need to start looking at, is like, if you want those bucks to stay around, take that doe out. She's the one that you got to take, So I like that. I like that. Okay, well, I want to be conscious of your time and everything, Don. One last question. I think I'm going to know the answer to it because you're a big deer hunter, but I'm going to ask this. At this time now, if you could go on any sort of hunt of any type, any state, anywhere, what would it be?
I'd just as soon hunt whitetails right here at home than anything. The older I get, I've been all over. I've been to Alaska. I've been in every state out west just about hunting. When I was younger, I'd go out west at least every other year. But whitetails is what trips my trigger, and the bigger the better, the older the better. The ultimate dream for me would be to chase a world record typical whitetail for 2 seasons and kill him on the last day of the second season. That would be the ultimate, and do it while I'm sleeping in my own bed every night. So that would be my dream hunt.
Yeah, I had a feeling that was, after listening to you a couple of times and, following you a little bit. I know you're a big deer hunter now. So is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything that we didn't touch on that you want to touch base on, or anything like that?
No, I can't think of anything. I just, I get to do a lot of these podcasts. I think I'm going to do 2 today. I'm going to do another one again this evening. My own Chasing Giants podcast, but this is like the 3rd one I've done in a week. But I just enjoy, conversing with other deer hunters. I appreciate all the support that I've had, through my magazine articles, my consulting, people coming to my seminars, real world wildlife product customers. We didn't even talk about my whitetail master course. I hold a class on my farm in late winter, early spring, where I take people right to the tree stands where I've shot booners. And, they're seeing the very stand. I'm laying out, my entrance for them to see, how I'm playing the wind, what the buck is doing, and how that buck is using the wind. Probably there's definitely no other course like it. We're going to 2 different properties I hunt, my own and another one a few miles away, looking at about 15 different tree stand locations and explaining those in detail, but also spending some time in a classroom with a PowerPoint presentation. Information about that's on my website, as well as my consulting service. Got the new YouTube channel. But, I just like hearing from deer hunters. One of my biggest, thrills these days is to hear from someone, a total stranger maybe, or someone that I've done a consulting visit for or whatever, that says, I just killed the biggest buck of my life. Here's a picture. And I killed him because of something I read in one of your articles, or something I heard you say on a podcast, or something I heard you say in a seminar or whatever. And that just means a lot to me, that I'm able to help someone else be successful. And, I'm just an everyday guy. I'm just a simple country boy like everybody else. And just chasing the dream like everybody else. There was a day when I was shooting little 1.5-year-old bucks. I slowly raised the bar, and I'm grateful for the opportunity I've got, and for all the people that have supported me in various ways.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being on here, man. Like I said, I'm just getting going on these podcasts. I'm hoping to, and I looked you up, and you were right on it, man, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate the listeners for listening again. And it's been fun, Don. And I'm hoping that people really take out. What I've heard you talk about. It blows my mind, the knowledge you have, and I really hope that my listeners and everything can really get that from, listening to you, and take some of that with them. So I appreciate you again for being on. And well, that'll be a wrap of episode 3.